In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful. I welcome you to this video where we'll be reading the verses from the Bible that talks about death, killing, murder, and war. And the reason I do this is because in reply to the claim made by the bigots which is that Islam allows terrorism and promotes it. And the reason they say that is because of the verses in the Quran that they take out of context, which talks about killing, war, and they take those verses out of context and they cherry pick the verses. So in reply to that, I'll be doing the same thing to the Bible. And I said in the last video, the last video regarding this topic, which was a video entitled, "Is Islam a Religion of Peace?" I read the verses from the Quran in its context. So I read the verses before and after those verses, and we could clearly see that the verses are not talking about going around killing people left and right for no reason. It was very clear that the verses were referring to self-defense. And I also took verses from the Bible in that video which talked about war and murder and killing, and I took them some in its context, which actually meant to kill unjustly. That's a case in the Old Testament, yes, that exists, that does exist in the Old Testament. And I also took verses from Jesus' own words, which indicated that he was telling people to kill, and those verses were out of context, and I did that intentionally to make a point that you can cherry pick verses from any text, including the Torah and the Bible, and the Old Testament, which is referred to also as the Torah. So I'll be doing the same thing in this video to make a point that you can easily cherry pick verses to make your claim. And as I said, the reason bigots or people in general say that Islam is a religion of war and terror is because of the verses in the Quran that they cherry pick out of context, and also because of what certain Muslim groups do. And the common claim by the Christian bigots is that Muslims are the one who are doing these things. They're the one who do the beheadings. They're the one who are attacking people. They're the one doing the killing. Even though Christians have violent verses in the Bible, they're not doing any of that. It's just the Muslims. Well, that's not true. There are many extremist groups within Christianity. For example, the LRA, the Lord Resistance Movement in Uganda. That's one of them. There are dozens of others, and we'll be discussing that in the third video of this series, or of this subject, rather. So on, without any further time, let us go ahead and read the verses from the Bible, both in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, that talks about violent killing, death, murder, and war. The first verse, Leviticus 20, verse 16. If a woman approaches an animal to have sexual relations with it, kill both the woman and the animal. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. I'll say it again. Leviticus 20, verse 16. If a woman approaches an animal to have sexual relations with it, kill both the women and the animal. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. So I find it ironic and strange that the Christians, the bigots among them, and other religions dare to claim and dare to say and dare to point the finger to Muslims and Islam and say they have relations with goats. They call them goat effers. Yet the Bible, the Old Testament, the Torah specifically talks about having intercourse with animals, and your people did it so often that your God had to send a verse telling them to stop doing it. Isn't that ironic? This is in the Old Testament, which is part of the Bible, and part of the Torah. The next verse. This is in the New Testament. Numbers 22, verse 29. Balaam answered the donkey. Now a man is here talking to a donkey. You have made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. A man here is talking to a donkey, and he threatens to kill him. The next verse in the New Testament, Numbers 25, verse 4. The Lord said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of these people, kill them, and expose them in the broad daylight before the Lord, so that the Lord's fierce anger may be turned away from Israel." So in this verse, the Lord, aka your Jesus, because you believe God is Jesus, and that the Father and the Son are both one and the same. Therefore, the Lord here is Jesus telling Moses, according to your theology and according to your religion, take the leaders of these people, who are the Jews, and kill them, so that God will not be angry with Israel. Why was God angry with Israel? I thought they are the chosen people. Next verse, Numbers 25, verse 17. Treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them. This is the peace and love of the Bible. Next verse. Judges 21, verse 11. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. This verse is telling the people to kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. Next verse. Jeremiah 15, verse 3. I will send 4 kinds of destroyers against them, declares the Lord, aka Jesus. The sword to kill, and the dogs to drag away, and the birds, and the wild animals to devour and destroy. Threat upon threat upon threat. Next verse. Jeremiah 50, verse 21. Attack the land of Metharaim and those who live in Pakod. Pursue, kill, and completely destroy them. Declares the Lord. Do everything I have commanded you. Prince of Peace, according to the Christians, aka God, aka Jesus, is telling people, kill and completely destroy, declares the Lord, aka your Jesus. Next verse. Ezekiel 14, verse 13. Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply and send famine upon it, and kill its people and their animals. Threat upon threat upon threat. There are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of verses in the Bible that talk about violent killing, threats made by God, aka Jesus, according to your theology, war upon war, murder, genocide. This is all in the Bible, yet you have enough nerve to point the finger to Islam and to the Quran. The next verse, Ezekiel 14 verse 17. Or if I bring a sword against that country and say, let the sword pass throughout the land, and I kill its people and their animals. Next verse, Ezekiel 14 verse 21. For this is what the sovereign Lord says, how much worse will it be when I send against Jerusalem my 4 dreadful judgments, sword and famine, and wild beasts and plague, to kill its men and their animals. Why is God threatening Jerusalem, the capital of the chosen people according to Christians, with famine, death, murder, plague, and disease? Why? Ezekiel 25 verse 13. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will stretch out my hand against Edom and kill both man and beast. I will lay it waste, and from Teman to Denan they will fall by the sword. Threat upon threat upon threat. The sovereign Lord, aka Jesus, Prince of Peace, according to the Christians, is threatening to kill and lay waste to the entire region. Ezekiel 29 verse 8. Therefore this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will bring a sword against you and kill both men and beast. Is this the mercy, tolerance of the Bible? You're going to have enough nerve to point to us when you have dozens and dozens and dozens of verses in your text that talks about killing, violence, murder, and war. Next verse, Amos 2 verse 3. I will destroy her ruler and kill all her officials with him, says the Lord. And notice, most of these verses are the Lord speaking, aka Jesus. Why? Because Christians believe the Father and the Son are both one and the same. So if the Father of the Old Testament, aka the Torah, is talking, that means Jesus himself is talking. Why? Because they believe Jesus and God are both one and the same.